This is a book review and mental health of the book. The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma by Bessel van der Kolk.
Okay, get ready because this deep dive, this is going to be a heavy one.
Yeah.
One of the Amazon reviewers, S. Rose, talks about going to the doctor over and over with what felt like heart attacks, only to be told nothing was wrong.
Oh, wow.
Imagine that your body is screaming, but traditional medicine just doesn't have the tools to understand why.
Yeah.
That's the kind of experience that we're going to unpack today as we kind of delve into this world of trauma.
Right?
You sent over excerpts from a book review and some Amazon reviews of The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk.
Okay.
And it seems like you're really interested in figuring out how trauma affects us, and not just in terms of, those painful memories.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating area. And this book, it's considered groundbreaking for a reason.
Yeah.
Van der Kolk goes beyond the surface and explores how trauma can actually rewire the brain and become embedded in our very being.
It's almost like our biology gets hijacked by these experiences.
Yeah.
The book review that you shared talks about 3 specific brain areas affected by trauma, and the first one is the amygdala.
Okay.
Can you remind me what the amygdala does again?
So think of the amygdala as your brain's smoke detector.
Okay.
It's responsible for detecting threats and triggering the fear response.
Right.
But after a traumatic experience, it's like that smoke detector becomes hypersensitive,
Oh.
going off even when there's no real fire.
So like you jump at the slightest sound after a stressful week.
Precisely.
Okay.
And to make matters worse, another part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is usually responsible for rational thought and emotional regulation, starts struggling to function properly.
Yeah.
It's like trying to think clearly in the middle of a panic attack.
Right.
Nearly impossible.
That makes sense. If your fear center is constantly on high alert, it's no wonder it's tough to think straight.
Yeah.
But there's a third brain area that's affected too, right? The hippocampus?
Yes, the hippocampus plays a crucial role in memory processing,
Okay.
helping us distinguish between past and present experiences.
All right.
But trauma can disrupt its function, leading to those vivid flashbacks, where it feels like the traumatic event is happening all over again, even though you know it's not.
Yeah. So S. Rose's experience with those unexplained physical symptoms starts to make a lot more sense now, right?
Right.
If the brain is struggling to differentiate between past and present,
Yeah,
maybe the body gets stuck in that trauma response too.
absolutely.
Which leads us right into this idea that the body literally keeps the score, which seems to be a central theme of the book.
That's right.
Yeah.
Van der Kolk's central thesis is that trauma isn't just a mental or emotional experience.
Right.
It also leaves a deep imprint on the body.
Yeah.
This can manifest in a variety of ways, from chronic pain and muscle tension to unexplained physical symptoms like those S. Rose described.
It's almost like the body is trying to communicate the trauma that the mind can't fully process.
Yeah.
So if the body is holding on to this trauma, does that explain why some people find traditional talk therapy just isn't enough?
That's a great question. Talking about the trauma is undeniably important.
Sure.
But as van der Kolk suggests, sometimes you need to address the body's response first.
Okay.
Imagine trying to reason with a panicked animal. You need to calm the animal's nervous system before it can even begin to understand what's happening.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
This idea of calming the body before working with the mind is really intriguing.
Yeah.
And speaking of calming,
Yeah.
both the book review and those Amazon reviews you sent highlighted the importance of connection for healing from trauma.
Okay.
Why do you think that is?
Well, trauma often shatters our sense of safety and trust, especially in relationships.
Right.
It makes it incredibly difficult to feel safe and connected with others,
Yeah.
which is heartbreaking because connection is precisely what trauma survivors need most.
It's like a tragic irony.
It is.
But the book doesn't just focus on the bleak side of things, right?
Right.
There's also a strong emphasis on finding new pathways to healing. One of the points that jumped out at me was van der Kolk's critique of the over-reliance on medication in traditional psychiatry.
Yeah, he's not dismissing medication entirely,
Okay.
but he does challenge the idea that it's a cure-all for trauma.
Yeah.
Medications can be helpful for managing certain symptoms, but they don't address the underlying trauma itself.
Right.
In the book review, they use the analogy of putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone.
Right.
You get a more comprehensive solution.
So what does a more comprehensive solution look like, according to van der Kolk?
Whoa.
I know he advocates for a more holistic approach, but what does that actually mean in practice?
He's a big proponent of what are called somatic therapies.
Okay.
things like yoga dance or body work,
Mm-hmm.
which help people reconnect with their physical sensations and regulate their nervous systems.
Right.
There's also a strong emphasis on mindfulness practices,
Okay.
which help people observe their thoughts and feelings without judgment.
It's almost like these approaches give the body a voice, a way to process the trauma that words alone can't capture. I know van der Kolk is also well known for his work with trauma-focused therapies like EMDR.
Right.
What can you tell me about that?
EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, has become increasingly popular in recent years.
Okay.
It's a specific technique that helps people process and integrate traumatic memories,
Okay.
making them less charged and disruptive.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That sounds fascinating. You know, one of the Amazon reviewers, Tom Cloyd, raved about EMDR
Yeah.
and even mentioned van der Kolk's own amusing anecdote about learning the technique.
Oh, really?
I read this on the Kindle app. I've actually been reading it for about a year, I'd say, and I've only now just finished. And I will tell you, it's an excellent expose on trauma and how it affects the full individual, particularly the body. It's been really useful in better knowing myself, especially in light of recent revelations in my own family. The author here is a true specialist who develops trust right away.
Hey guys, I'm Alexa. I'm here to do a review on the book, The Body Keeps the Score. This was recommended to me by a therapist. If you ever experienced trauma, this book basically talks about how the brain, the mind, and the body are all interconnected when it comes to trauma. I feel like everybody can get something from this book. So if you're looking to dive a little deeper, this is definitely a book I would recommend.
What's interesting is that van der Kolk doesn't seem dogmatic about any one approach.
Sure.
He seems open to a whole range of therapies and practices.
Exactly. He recognizes that there's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to healing from trauma.
Yeah.
It's about finding what works for each individual, whether it's somatic therapies, mindfulness EMDR, or creative outlets like art or music.
It's like creating a personalized toolkit for healing.
Yeah.
I think that's a really empowering message, and it seems to be at the heart of The Body Keeps the Score.
Absolutely.
Understanding how trauma affects you gives you the power to change those patterns.
Absolutely. It's not about dwelling in victimhood.
Right.
It's about reclaiming your agency and creating a more fulfilling future.
And sometimes that journey requires us to challenge some deeply ingrained beliefs about trauma, which brings us to another fascinating point that van der Kolk makes.
Right. It's so interesting how van der Kolk really challenges that traditional medical model when it comes to trauma.
Yeah.
He argues that simply popping a pill
Right.
isn't enough to address these complex and deep-rooted effects of trauma.
Yeah, it's like expecting a Band-Aid to fix a broken bone, right?
Exactly.
The book review talked about how van der Kolk sees medication as a potential tool, for managing symptoms, but not as a cure.
Exactly. Medications can provide temporary relief,
Right.
but they don't heal the underlying wounds.
Yeah.
Van der Kolk advocates for a more holistic approach that recognizes the interconnectedness of mind, body, and spirit.
Right.
It's about addressing the trauma on multiple levels.
And that's where those alternative therapies you mentioned earlier come in,
Yes.
like yoga mindfulness and EMDR.
Right.
They all seem to focus on helping people reconnect with their bodies and regulate their nervous systems.
Absolutely.
I'm particularly curious about EMDR.
Yeah.
Reading Tom Cloyd's Amazon review about it really piqued my interest.
Okay.
Can you tell me a bit more about how eye movements can actually help process traumatic memories?
So it might sound a little unconventional,
Yeah.
but there's growing evidence to suggest that EMDR can be quite effective.
Interesting.
While the exact mechanisms are still being studied,
Okay.
the eye movements seem to help stimulate the brain's information processing system, allowing traumatic memories to be reprocessed and integrated in a less distressing way.
Okay.
It's like helping the brain file those memories properly so they don't keep popping up at random and causing so much distress.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's like giving the brain a chance to finally organize its files and put those traumatic memories where they belong.
Exactly.
But it's not just about finding the right technique, is it?
Right.
Several of the Amazon reviewers emphasize the importance of finding a therapist who truly understands trauma.
That's absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
Empathy and good intentions are important, but it's not enough.
Right.
A therapist needs to have a deep understanding of how trauma affects the brain, the body, and the nervous system. They need to be able to recognize the subtle ways in which trauma can manifest and provide the appropriate support and guidance.
It makes me think of going to a mechanic who doesn't know how to fix your specific type of engine.
Right.
You might get a temporary fix,
Yeah.
but the underlying problem will persist.
Exactly.
So how can someone find a therapist who specializes in trauma?
It's definitely worth doing some research.
Okay.
Look for therapists who specifically mention trauma-informed care in their bios or websites. Ask for recommendations from trusted sources like friends, family members, or even other healthcare professionals.
Okay.
Many professional organizations also have online directories where you can search for therapists who specialize in trauma.
That's great advice. And even when you find a therapist who specializes in trauma,
Yeah,
it sounds like there's still no one-size-fits-all approach to healing.
exactly. What works for one person might not work for another.
Right.
Kolk emphasizes the importance of individualized treatment plans. It's about finding the tools and techniques that resonate with you and help you move towards recovery at your own pace.
Okay.
Some people might benefit greatly from somatic therapies, while others might find solace in creative outlets like art, music, or writing.
Right.
It's really about empowering individuals to take an active role in their healing journey.
And that sense of empowerment seems to be a key theme in The Body Keeps the Score.
Absolutely.
It's not a book that dwells in victimhood.
No.
It's about understanding the impact of trauma and then using that knowledge to reclaim your life and your sense of self.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that trauma can leave deep scars, but it doesn't have to define you.
Yeah.
There is hope for healing, for growth, for transformation.
Reading through those Amazon reviews, I was really struck by how honest and vulnerable the reviewers were. It seemed like this book really resonated with people on a deep level, offering a sense of validation and understanding that they hadn't found elsewhere.
Right.
Did you have a similar experience when you first read it?
Absolutely. It's incredibly moving to witness the power of a book, to connect with people in such a profound way.
Yeah.
It speaks to the universality of trauma and the deep human need for connection and healing. I think one of the reasons it resonates so deeply is that it moves beyond the clinical and speaks to the heart of the human experience.
It acknowledges the pain and suffering, but also reminds us of our innate capacity for resilience and growth. And it doesn't shy away from challenging some of our preconceived notions about what trauma is and who it affects.
Right.
One of the things Kolk talks about is how even seemingly small events can be traumatic.
Right.
Depending on the individual and their circumstances.
Right.
It's not just about war or violence.
That's right. Trauma is not just about the event itself.
Right.
It's about the individual's subjective experience of that event and their ability to process and integrate it.
Sure.
What might seem insignificant to one person could be deeply traumatic for another,
Right.
especially if they were already vulnerable or had a history of previous trauma.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
It highlights the importance of avoiding judgments about what constitutes a traumatic experience.
Absolutely.
We need to create safe spaces where people feel comfortable sharing their experiences without fear of being dismissed or invalidated.
Absolutely. We need to foster a culture of empathy and understanding where individuals feel supported and validated in their experiences, no matter how big or small they may seem to others.
Yeah.
And we need to move away from this idea that trauma is something you just get over with time.
Right.
As The Body Keeps the Score so powerfully demonstrates, trauma can have a lasting impact on the brain, the body, and the nervous system.
It's not a simple matter of time healing all wounds.
Right.
Trauma can fundamentally alter our perception of the world,
Yeah.
our relationships, and even our sense of self. And without proper support and intervention, those effects can linger for years, even decades.
Absolutely.
Which is why early intervention is so crucial.
Absolutely.
And
The sooner we can address the trauma and provide the necessary support,
yeah,
the better the chances of preventing those long-term consequences.
right.
We need to create trauma-informed schools healthcare systems, and social service agencies
Yeah.
that recognize the prevalence of trauma and respond in ways that are sensitive and supportive.
It sounds like we need a paradigm shift in how we think about and approach trauma.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
We need to move from a model of blaming and shaming to a model of understanding and support.
Right.
We need to recognize that trauma is not a sign of weakness, but a normal human response to overwhelming experiences.
And we need to remember that healing is possible.
Absolutely.
It might not be easy or linear, but there is always hope for recovery and growth.
That's such an important message.
Yeah.
And it's one that van der Kolk reiterates throughout the book.
Right.
He doesn't just offer a scientific explanation of trauma. He also offers a deeply compassionate and humane perspective on the human condition.
Right.
He helps us understand that even in the face of profound suffering, we retain our innate capacity for resilience, connection, and joy.
And that resilience can manifest in the most unexpected ways.
Yes.
One of the things that fascinated me was how van der Kolk highlights the healing power of creative expression. He talks about how therapies like art, music, or theater can provide powerful nonverbal outlets for processing trauma. Sometimes it's not about talking it out, it's about expressing it through different mediums.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
These creative outlets can help us tap into the body's innate wisdom and allow it to communicate and heal in ways that words often can't capture.
Yeah.
And they can also help to foster a sense of agency and empowerment, allowing individuals to reclaim their voices and tell their stories on their own terms.
It's about shifting the narrative from one of victimhood to one of survivorship,
Exactly.
from silence to self-expression, from powerlessness to agency.
Right.
It's about recognizing that trauma is not the end of the story.
Yes.
It can be a turning point, an opportunity for growth, for transformation,
Yeah.
for a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
And that's why books like The Body Keeps the Score are so important.
Yeah.
They help to shift the conversation around trauma, challenge misconceptions, and offer hope for healing and change.
Well, this deep dive has really been eye-opening for me, and
Yeah.
I'm sure our listener is feeling the same way.
I hope so.
We've covered a lot of ground,
You have.
but I'm curious to hear your perspective on some of the common misconceptions about trauma that you encounter in your work.
Yeah, one of the biggest misconceptions is that trauma is something that only happens to people who've experienced extreme events like war or violence.
Right.
But in reality, trauma can result from any experience that overwhelms our capacity to cope.
Yeah.
It could be a car accident, a natural disaster,
Right.
childhood bullying, or even chronic stress and neglect.
Right.
It's not about the event itself.
Yeah.
It's about the individual's experience of that event and their ability to process it.
That's a really important point to emphasize.
It is.
Trauma is not a sign of weakness.
Right.
It's a normal human response to overwhelming events.
Exactly.
And another common misconception is that if you've experienced something traumatic, you should just be able to get over it.
Right.
But as we've discussed, trauma can have long-lasting effects on the brain, the body, and the nervous system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of willpower or simply choosing to move on.
Right.
Trauma can leave deep wounds that need time, care, and support to heal.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's still a lot of stigma surrounding trauma,
Right.
which can prevent people from seeking help.
I think that's why it's so crucial to keep having these conversations, to educate ourselves and others about the complexities of trauma and the many pathways to healing.
Absolutely.
The Tuesday after the 4th of July weekend, 1978, was my first day as a staff psychiatrist at the Boston Veterans Administration Clinic. As I was hanging a reproduction of my favorite Bruegel painting, The Blind Leading the Blind, on the wall of my new office, I heard a commotion in the reception area down the hall. A moment later, a large, disheveled man in a stained three-piece suit, carrying a copy of Soldier of Fortune magazine under his arm, burst through my door. He was so agitated and so clearly hungover that I wondered how I could possibly help this hulking man. I asked him to take a seat and tell me what I could do for him. His name was Tom. 10 years earlier, he had been in the Marines, doing his service in Vietnam. He had spent the holiday weekend holed up in his downtown Boston law office, drinking and looking at old photographs, rather than with his family. He knew from previous years' experience that the noise, the fireworks, the heat, and the picnic in his sister's backyard, against the backdrop of dense early summer foliage, all of which reminded him of Vietnam, would drive him crazy. When he got upset, he was afraid to be around his family because he behaved like a monster with his wife and 2 young boys. The noise of his kids made him so agitated that he would storm out of the house to keep himself from hurting them. Only drinking himself into oblivion or riding his Harley Davidson at dangerously high speeds helped him to calm down.
Oh.
The more we understand about trauma,
Yeah.
the better equipped we'll be to support ourselves and others who are struggling.
Right.
And books like The Body Keeps the Score play a vital role in raising awareness and breaking down those harmful stigmas.
Well, I'd say we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah.
From the neurobiology of trauma to the importance of finding the right support and challenging common misconceptions.
We have.
I imagine our listeners feeling pretty informed and perhaps even a bit overwhelmed by all this information.
It's a lot to take in, but I encourage you to sit with these ideas, reflect on your own experiences, and perhaps even explore some of the resources mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
Remember, this deep dive was just a glimpse into the vast world of trauma research and the many pathways to healing. Yeah, it's a journey, not a destination.
Right.
And this book really drives that point home.
Yeah.
Healing from trauma takes time, patience, and a willingness to explore different approaches until you find what works for you.
That really resonated with me too, especially when I think back to that veteran Tom who shared his experience in one of the Amazon reviews. He talked about feeling obligated to keep his trauma alive, almost like it was a way of honoring his fallen comrades.
That's such a powerful example of how trauma can distort our sense of loyalty and responsibility.
Yeah.
He felt trapped by the past, unable to move forward without betraying the memory of those he had lost.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking, but also highlights the complexity of trauma.
It makes me wonder if that's where the concept of self-compassion becomes so important. Not forgetting or minimizing the trauma,
Yeah,
but recognizing that we deserve kindness and care,
absolutely.
even when we're struggling with these difficult emotions and memories.
Trauma often leaves us feeling broken and unworthy,
Right.
but self-compassion allows us to acknowledge our pain without judgment, to offer ourselves the same kindness and understanding that we would offer a loved one.
It's like extending a hand of friendship to ourselves, even in the darkest of moments.
Exactly. And that interconnection, that sense of self-compassion, is often the foundation upon which true healing can begin.
That brings me back to something we touched on earlier, this idea that The Body Keeps the Score isn't just a book about trauma.
Yeah.
It's a book about reclaiming our humanity,
Right.
about rediscovering our capacity for connection, resilience, and joy,
Yeah.
even after experiencing something so painful.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that trauma is not the end of the story.
Right.
It can be a turning point, an opportunity for growth and transformation,
Yeah.
and for developing a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
You know, as we're wrapping up this deep dive, I keep thinking about something you said earlier, about how healing is possible even from the most profound wounds. It's a message of hope that I think is so important to emphasize.
It is a message of hope.
Yeah.
And it's a message that's backed by science and by countless stories of resilience and recovery.
Right.
van der Kolk's book doesn't offer easy answers or quick fixes,
Right.
but it does provide a roadmap for healing.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we're not alone in this journey and that there are resources available, people who care, and effective tools and techniques that can help us reclaim our lives.
And it starts with understanding, right?
Absolutely.
Understanding how trauma affects us both physically and emotionally.
Right.
Once we have that knowledge, we can start to make informed choices about our healing journey.
Exactly. Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And when it comes to trauma, knowledge can be incredibly liberating. It allows us to move from a place of fear and confusion to a place of empowerment and agency.
Well, on that note of empowerment and hope, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
We've explored some challenging terrain today, but I hope you, our listener, are walking away with a deeper understanding of trauma and the many pathways to healing.
I hope so too. And remember, you are not alone.
Yes.
There are resources available, there are people who care, and there is always hope for a brighter future.
If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to explore The Body Keeps the Score further.
Yeah.
It's a powerful and insightful book that can offer guidance and support on your own healing journey.
Absolutely.
And remember, understanding trauma is the first step towards reclaiming your power and building a more resilient and fulfilling life.
Make sure to stay tuned on our channel for our next mental health book review about this book. The Shadow Work Journal. A Guide to Integrate and Transcend Your Shadows by Kayla Shaheen. Kayla Shaheen's expanded edition delves into exploring repressed parts of the psyche, offering exercises and therapeutic tips to aid personal growth and self-awareness. Don't forget to like, subscribe, And hit the notification bell so you don't miss this or any of our upcoming reviews. See you soon on Mental Pages. Let's turn the page to better mental health.